So you've just seen now how to pass information in to a function. This module I will show you how to get information back out of a function. And a function can return information to the calling environment in two different ways. The first is to use output. And I'm just talking about standard output. I'll go into that in more in a moment. And the second is by way of an exit status. Now you recall we've talked about exit statuses before when we've been using if statements and while loops. Well, now we're going to talk about them in conjunction with functions and how you can actually set an exit status for your function. But that's in a moment as well. First I want to talk about function output. So this is the first of those two options. It's actually fairly straightforward. The function output, the output the function produces, is actually just the combined output of all the programs run within the code block of the function. For example, the who program or ls or echo or any of those programs. If they produce output, then the function produces output. It's pretty much as simple as that. Now, typically this output will just go onto the screen, but you can actually get it to go somewhere else if you do this in the following way. Now these are all ways that you've seen before, just not in conjunction with functions. You could send the output of a function to another program, for example a filter like wc-l, just by piping it. So sample_func would be the name of a function, and theoretically that function would produce output. Of course you can also send it to a file. You can say sample_func redirected to file 1, and more interestingly, this is a slightly more clever option, we have the ability to take the output of that function and store it in a variable using the back quotes. Now we've seen this technique before, the back quotes technique, especially in conjunction with the expr program, if you recall. And it's just interesting to know that we can actually use exactly the same technique without any modifications at all in relation to functions. So I guess you can summarize this page by saying that functions behave just like any other Unix command. Now, also, every other Unix command produces an exit status, and functions are actually no exception. They produce exit statuses as well, even if you don't explicitly program your function to set one yourself. It works like this. If you do not specify an exit status for your function, then the exit status of the last command that your function executes will be used. So if the very last thing that your function does, for example, is an ls, then the exit status of the ls program will be the exit status of your function. Now, if you actually want to specify an exit status, you can. You must use the return statement in the following way. You simply say return and then a number, and that number will represent the exit status that you're trying to create, which of course will be typically 0 for no error, or 1 for some kind of error, or alternatively you can think of it as 0 being true and 1 being false. Make sure that you don't actually return true or false. There's an actual program called true and a program called false. You cannot actually say return space true or return space false. You cannot do that. I'll leave that as an exercise for you to work out why. You might actually like to try writing a little function in a shell script to do that and testing it and see what kind of messages that you get. So an example of a fully written function that uses the exit status facility using the return statement is the following. I've written a little function called validFile, whose sole purpose in life is to determine whether a given file, its parameter, its one and only parameter, is valid or not. So it will return 1 or 0. So let's have a look at it. The very first thing in the function is that we test to see whether the file is readable. So if it's not readable, then we return 1, which we can interpret as meaning false. Notice that no output is produced here. We are simply returning a exit status. So now if we made it past that first line, then it must have been readable. Let's test it to see if it contains the string log file. So if theoretically, according to the logic of this little function, if the file contains the word log file, then it is a valid file. So what this will do is it will test to see whether grep actually finds the word log file in it, and if it doesn't, it will return 1. And if we successfully make it past that line, then grep must have found log file in the file, so we can safely return 0. Notice that no output is produced at any time, not even via the grep, because I've redirected the grep output to /dev/null. So this little valid file function can be used in the following way. We can say if valid file and then specify the file name that we want to test, so then we can read that as saying if made21.log is a valid file, then da 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 da, and do some particular processing there. Now there's one thing that we actually need to keep in mind when using the return statement, and that is that it's actually similar to the exit statement. Now we've used exit before, we've used exit just on the regular shell command line, and we've probably also used it inside a shell script. They're similar, but they should not be confused. Here's the difference. The return statement actually terminates the execution of the current function, and that's all, whereas the exit statement terminates the execution of the entire shell. Now if you've placed that in a shell script, then that means that typically the shell script will terminate and you'll be left back at your login shell. And whether you use return or exit, both of them take an optional parameter. That number represents the exit status that is returned to the calling environment. Now if it's a function, that represents the function's exit status, and if it's using exit, as in exit the whole shell script, then the number will represent the exit status of the entire shell script. So that's about it for exit statuses. It's actually not that hard. It does take a little bit of getting your head around it because it's an unusual concept, but it's not a difficult concept. So maybe have a little bit of a practice using that before we get to the chapter exercises in a couple of modules' time.